welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. My name is Dean Jones, and I'm your host, and this is Season 7, Episode 9. Today I have on my program Neil Buttery. He is a British author who often writes about British food history, and he has this book out. It's out now this week called A Dark History of Sugar, and it's an amazing book, and it really details the chronicle of sugar from its inception to modern use. And it's a historical perspective, but it also talks about socioeconomic issues, issues such as slavery, and now the modern issues such as diabetes. It's a really all-encompassing treatise on the history of sugar, and it's a phenomenal work. I can't emphasize enough what a great book this is, and just how well written it is. Neil is just a great guest. I love talking to him. I talked to him for over an hour, and I really enjoyed it. I could have talked to him for 5 hours. Just a great guest. I really hope that we get to have him on the podcast again several times, just because I love talking to him in general about anything. Just really great, funny guy, smart guy, really great guest. So that being said, we're going to go on to the program, and I hope you like it. And we're going to have links to get the book in the bio for you, as well as his website and his own podcasts. So we'll have that information as well. On we go to my conversation with Neil Buttery. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. I'm Dean Jones, your host. Today, I'm very happy to have on the program Neil Buttery, who has a book coming out, The Dark History of Sugar. Neil, thank you for being on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, for our listeners who are not familiar with your work yet, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Right. Well, I'm Dr. Neil Buttery. I'm a food historian and scientist, I suppose. I find, and a bit of a chef too. I find it hard to kind of pin down exactly what I am. It depends on what mood I've woken up that day. But so I guess I started off first of all in science. Evolutionary biology was my thing, in particular social evolution, so the evolution of cooperation and altruism and sort of group behavior. And then, I started the PhD. I'd been out of science for quite a while, or out of academia for quite a while. I'd been a high school science teacher. So I thought I need to practice writing. So I started up my blog, cooking through Jane Grigson recipes, just because, well, it was a way to practice writing, and it was something completely different to the PhD. It was much more informal. The point is that I could get over the fear that a lot of us have, I think, of, that flashing cursor in the top corner of a blank page. Just, how do I get started? How do I approach writing? So that was it, really. I only did it as a blog so that I had that kind of extra factor that, somebody might actually read it. So I'm going to have to make sure it's good. And that's kind of where the science and the food and the history got joined together, although I didn't realize it would kind of become my career in the end.
You have or covered two of my favorite subjects. I'm a armchair science nerd who had wished I had gone into that field when I was younger, and I love food, and I love British food specifically. I was lucky enough to have spent some time in England when I was younger, and I really enjoyed the British food, and it just makes me so mad when people talk out their ass about British food and say, you can't eat well in England. And I'm like, excuse me, I never have eaten better than when I was in England. And I really had a love of the British food. Do you think, what do you think of that idea, about British food? Because I even heard British people talk about it. Do you think there's a misconception about British food? And are you working to dispel that?
Well, yes. So certainly, because I lived in the US for a couple of years, so I'd often ask people, what is their view of what British food is? Yeah, and I got some fairly disparaging remarks, meaning that it was kind of boring, that it was black pudding or blood sausage and boiled meat. That's kind of what most people seem to think of as the archetypical bad cooking in England, or in Britain, should I say. And it has the same reputation in Europe and the same reputation in Britain. And yeah, it's something that I kind of find a little bit depressing. It's funny, we kind of frown upon certainly the kind of more frugal foods, the more rustic foods, which is odd, so you go to Italy or France, and they absolutely love their rustic provincial foods and really take a lot of pride in it. And somewhere, I think we lost it in Britain. I always blame the fact that we had two big long stints of food rationing in the two world wars.
Yeah.
I think that's possibly a bit of a simplistic reason, but for some reason we have lost our cooking skills a little bit. And I'm sure you do a lot of cooking, and with simple foods, it only looks simple when you look at a recipe. Actually, it's the devil's in the detail, and you have to look at everything very carefully, season things carefully, and be a good judge. And often the recipes, well, you can read them, but the best thing is to be shown. And that, of course, used to be traditionally maybe shown by mum or by grandma. And that kind of thing has really disappeared. And we're all trying to rediscover them by reading recipes. That's how I've done it. And there's a lot of trial and error doing it that way, unfortunately. But I feel that I'm getting close now to being a good British cook.
I think people read recipes and don't try them, and that makes me angry because, I mean, my son grew up eating toad in the hole, and we loved it. And people go, "Oh, toad in the hole," they laugh, but it's like, what are you laughing at? It's actually good. Have you ever actually
really
tried
good.
it? And spotted dick, everybody loves to talk about spotted dick, but I'm like, it's a freaking great dessert, and if you make it well, and it's really really nice. And I mean, you can laugh at the name all you want. We have lots of ridiculous named things in America. So like, I mean, it's try it for Christ's sakes, is what I always say, and there's so many really nice recipes. Like I like to make simnel cake, and I like to make seed cake and all this different. I like to do a lot of baking and from the British cookbooks. And there's just so many really lovely recipes. When people talk disparagingly, I just want to smack them and go, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I had the same problem because what I ended up doing was, although I was cooking lots of regional food, ended up looking into the history. I really got into the history of it all. And so I had to do a similar thing because you go back a few centuries and all the food is weird and strange. So it may as well be a different country. And the thing that I really learned quickly was, wait a minute, none of these people are starving. You're not eating, these are cookery books. And if they're old cookery books, it's usually a book that is owned by some people who are fairly rich. So they're eating this food because they like it. They're not eating it because, sorry, they're not eating it because it's the only thing they have.
Right.
It's not just gruel or whatever poor people might be eating. They're eating this because they like it. And they're also probably showing off to other people as well.
Yeah.
So that's the mental block, I suppose, that you have to get over. So for me, I mean, I was quite a squeamish cook at first, but I've ended up, eating all sorts of game, offal, brains and all sorts of stuff. I was very squeamish about shellfish and seafood. In my family, growing up in Yorkshire, we didn't really eat much fish at all. So I was just a bit naturally squeamish about that. And it turns out it's all good. There's not a single thing I don't like. It's all good.
Traditionally British recipe, cookbook, not cookbook, sorry, I'm losing my brain. There's a specifically British restaurant in London. I'm trying to think of the cook they do a lot of offal.
Yeah, it's St. John's.
St. John's. Henderson's. Have you been to St. John's?
I have never been to St. John's.
It's my dream to go there one day.
No, it is mine as well.
They have the brain burger, and they have a lot of really wonderful, clever things. I look at his cookbooks, and I'm just like, oh my God, I really can't wait to go here one day.
No, I mean, for me, he is the current sort of archetypical traditional British chef. If you go back to the 18th century, I think the 18th century is really the pinnacle where what we think of as traditional British food. So all those puddings, like you were talking about, Yorkshire puddings and spotted dick and toad in the hole, which are just pancakes and sausages, by the way. And we are like You're going back. It's just pancake sausage. It's just baked instead of fried. It's not a big deal. And he's just kind of really brought it back. And they were offal blind back in those days. A tongue was just as good as a bit of sirloin. There was no differentiation. The important thing is you ate all the animals, really interesting different flavors and textures and colors. It was a thing to relish, as it were. And he's really kind of bringing that back. And, blood cakes are on there because, blood tastes nice.
Yeah, no, I really love black pudding. And
that's a signature dish, isn't it? The blood cake.
Oh, it's so good. And I'd really love that stuff. And it's something that I want to make myself, because people talk about it, but I'm like, if you've not had it, don't, give it a try before you, slam it. You really got to give it a shot. It's funny too, because you put another name on something and they'll eat it. Like I know somebody, they go, I'll never eat tongue. I'm like, last week we had lengua tacos. You had tongue. And they're like, what? I'm like, you ate it with gusto. But if you call it tongue, you're not going to eat it. And I think they put a different, it's funny. It's just like, what's in the name? But people really are affected by the names of things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're changing things. In the UK, it's blood orange season at the moment. Like those lovely red oranges that you get with the red juice.
Yeah.
There's a big campaign changing the name to ruby oranges because they think the word blood is putting people off. Idiots. It's just like, oh, come on, it's an orange.
I served, I made something for a potluck once for people that said they never eat tuna casserole. So I called it pasta di la mer, and they ate it with gusto. And I'm like, you just ate tuna casserole. And they were like, what? Now,
exactly.
In 2007, you were an early adopter of the blog, and you started doing food writing with the Neil Cooks Grigson. When you started that, I know that you were doing a lot of writing for your dissertation. Had you planned on doing any food writing, or did you just kind of fall into it?
So I chose it because I was always into my cooking. My mum was a big cook, so I've always felt comfortable in the kitchen. I chose something that I thought was really the antithesis of doing a PhD. So the idea was I wasn't going to really research it. I was just going to enjoy it.
Right.
In fact, it wasn't even my idea to write a blog about it. It was actually a friend of mine who suggested it, and I chose English Food by Jane Grigson. I'd been bought it a few years ago by a friend, just in a pack of other books, Penguin books. And I didn't actually know that much about English food. I was mainly focusing on Asian cuisine and Italian. So I thought, oh, you know what? Apart from a shepherd's pie and a roast beef, I don't really cook that much British food or English food. So I'll do that. So, be an interesting project. And it was a friend who said, no, why don't you cook all the recipes in it? And they said, oh, then why don't you write a blog on it? I've not heard of Julie and Julia, the famous blog.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd not really read any blogs. It was purely to help me with writing.
Yeah.
So I just did not expect it to snowball in the way it did. In fact, if I'd had the plan for it to become some blogger or some writer, I think, it would have happened much more quickly because I've been doing it 13 or 14 years now. But I think also it would have just taken the fun out of it. And, although I do sometimes get snowed under with having too much work to do, so it doesn't always feel like a hobby. When you're doing it at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, it's not a hobby anymore.
Yeah.
But, I just have to kind of remember, actually, I'm extremely lucky to be able to do what I do and essentially cherry pick the things that I'm interested in, the best bits of science, the best bits of cooking, the best bits of history, and, smushing them all together. It's great.
You were in America for a little bit. Where were you in America?
So I was at Rice University in Houston for a year. So just as I finished my PhD in the lab of David Queller and Joan Strassman, an excellent pair of social evolutionary biologists. And then we moved after a year to Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did you like Texas? Were you able to get some good Texan food when you were there?
I did like, yes. Well, I did like, yes. But I moved there right at the end of August and got hit by the wall of humidity and heat.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
I'm
gross.
a pasty Yorkshireman, so I can't cope with anything above 68 degrees. I start to go all funny.
Most people can't
so that was
handle
a
that.
shock.
Yeah, it's not fun. You got to be in an air-conditioned place when you live there.
Yeah. So that wasn't fun, but I absolutely loved the place. It takes a while to get used to Houston. It's and just to American cities in general, we don't have a grid system in Britain at all. So that was a new thing. And all the buildings were quite new in Houston. Everything was kind of 50 or 60 years old, because I guess that's when cheap air conditioning was around. So everything's kind of suddenly pops up and everything looks kind of the same. All the buildings look the same. But then when you go inside the buildings, there's just these amazing bars and restaurants. So it took me a little while to get my head around Houston. Moving to St. Louis, it was a bit different. There's a bit more history there, as it were.
Yeah.
It's an ex-industrial city like Manchester, where I'd moved from.
That's a good analogy.
They were quite similar places, actually. So I hit the ground running with St. Louis.
Now, I have a lot of relatives from Texas and I've spent a lot of time in Texas. Did you have any language barriers? Did you understand? I know my relatives, I don't always understand what they're saying sometimes. They're like, you fixing to do something? Y'all fixing?
Yeah, it's funny. There's all sorts of little quirks. There's the minor ones. See, what the weird thing is you see, in England, you get loads of American TV. So you think the American culture and slang words and the way to say words or sentences and that kind of thing, because just the emphasis on different letters. There's oregano or there's oregano.
Yeah.
All those little differences. But what I found was when I moved there, although a lot of people were Anglophiles, I don't think there's as much British TV and film over in America. So I found it quite hard. Most people had I'll start that sentence again. Yeah. Most people had the cultural block with me rather than me with them, if that makes any sense. I kind of, I knew all the little quirks.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a few that I didn't know, but I felt like I could hold my own.
Yeah.
But I would find that, lots of people couldn't understand me. And with my Yorkshire Northern English accent, there's some vowel sounds coming out of my mouth that I just never heard in America. So there was a few little difficulties there.
There's some places I go to and I don't even understand it. I'm from here, and Boston is crazy for me. I'm like, sometimes I don't understand, or New England, you can get some weird words and stuff there. I don't even know what they're saying sometimes. When did you think?
Have you seen the film The Witch, the David Eggers film?
Yeah,
The Witch?
Yeah.
I mean, that's such an amazing film. I mean, I loved the speech there, and they really spent a lot of time getting that authentic. And it's a brilliant film. It is a brilliant film, and that is full on old school Yorkshire speaking, and I just found it revelation. Even though I kind of knew that, but just actually seeing it, people talking so effortlessly, I just thought it was such a great thing to see. That at one point my accent wasn't weird. At one point it was the norm.
I love Yorkshire. I love Yorkshire, everything about Yorkshire. Like, if I get to go to England again, my first place to go will be to Yorkshire and the Dales specifically. I'm a huge,
it's great. Yes.
I'm a huge nerd of all creatures great and small.
Oh, okay.
And I've looked at all the stuff on the walking tours there, and that just sounds to be the best of times for me. And I love the Yorkshire accent. And at times it reminds me of my relatives who are from the South. My grandfather was originally from, he was from Arkansas, but I think he was from around, I think he was born in another state. And I think sometimes he said things that really reminded me of a lot of Yorkshire sayings. And he was a big farmer and always had done farming. He would have loved, I think, Yorkshire. He would have fit right in there. And my grandmother was from Arkansas, but she said a lot of things that reminded me of Yorkshire. I don't know what the dichotomy of that is, but it seemed like I kept thinking, like, I hear some of the old like movies where they talk in the Yorkshire accent from the 1800s, and I'm going,
Mm-hmm.
this is my grandparents. It's so weird how similar it is. Now, you ran a small restaurant for a couple of years called the Buttery. Can we talk
Yeah,
about that a little bit? That sounds really
sure. Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah, because I mean, we're talking about doing research and food writing, but of course, when I was cooking all these recipes, I was teaching myself how to cook. And really, it was in the US where the penny dropped about starting up a food business, because I was making things like spotted dick and jam roly-poly puddings and
Oh, yeah.
pork pies and stuff like that, and getting all my friends around from, that I worked with in the lab, and they all really liked the food. And that's when I kind of thought, could I actually get away with selling this? I couldn't do that as an alien in America. So I thought, hang on, this could be a thing. I'd started to get a little bit frustrated with science. I was having lots of good ideas of what I thought were good ideas, kind of being poo-pooed. And then it turned out 6 or 9 months down the road, some other lab had actually had the same idea, got the results, and we're getting, some really good publications. So I chucked my toys out of the pram a little bit at this point, and I was feeling a bit depressed. So that was also at the back of my mind. But I started thinking about it more and more, and I just thought, you know what? I think I can do this. So I resigned from my job in America, in St. Louis. And in the kind of few months that I had before I moved back, I just made a big plan. And I started off making just a limited amount of food on artisan food markets. So I moved back, I think it was the start of the August. So I'd been there exactly 2 years. And 2 weeks later, I was doing my first market. I thought, I don't want to stop. I don't need to get over my jet lag or anything like that. Because if I stop, I'll think about it, I'll overthink it, worry about it, and then chicken out. Because I know what I'm like. So it's like, I'm just going to go there and do it. And in a way, I've just kept on going. There's always been, it's been desperate a few times. But yeah, I started off doing the markets. Then I started doing a pop-up restaurant at home. I shoved all my furniture upstairs, brought in tables and chairs at a weekend, kind of did just one weekend every other month. And yeah, then I was like, okay, I think I can actually get a proper bricks and mortar place. I teamed up with a friend. Well, it wasn't a friend, actually. We kind of knew each other, but a mutual friend put us together. He wanted to open up a restaurant, traditional British food. He had lots of experience front of house, which I'd none. And we teamed up, and for a couple of years, we ran a little quite successful restaurant. It all went a little bit wrong after 2 years, but it was fantastic because I was able to do really old-fashioned fare. I think I did. What did I do? Snipe and woodcock, things that you don't normally see on a menu anymore. Mock turtle soup.
Yeah.
I could kind of really make things that there's no way I could have made at home, just cooking for, 2 or 3 people, or even for 8 or 9 people. They're just best suited for a restaurant setting. So it was a massive learning curve, because you think you know how to cook, and yes, you do know how to cook, but that is not the same as running a kitchen. So that was a big old nightmare. And then just as we were getting it down to a fine art, unfortunately, we had to close, which was a shame.
What was when you served people who got to have some of these traditional foods, what was the response you got from some of your patrons?
Oh, really positive. It wasn't all weird and wonderful stuff. You have to have stuff that people are going to expect, maybe some pies that are familiar, or stews and casseroles, that are a bit more standard. So I felt like we were covering all bases. It took a while for people to trust me. I tried putting things like sweetbreads and calf's liver on the menu at first, and people were just like, "No, this is weird. Why are you giving us weird food? So I really had to kind of go slowly catchy monkey with this one, and just do some fairly basic stuff, just and do it well, and start to sneak in the so-called weird ingredients. And then I was off. Yeah, it was really good. And in fact, a couple of people mentioned, that it was quite close to somewhere like St. John's, which, I was very pleased about when people made those kind of those comments. I'm not trying to replicate the place, but
right.
we've certainly got the same philosophy about things.
Yeah, traditional British. And I think it just drives. I would give anything to find places that will serve liver and things like that now, because you mentioned that, and I'm like, I remember when I was young, I could always find liver in restaurants, and my brothers and I, even as children, would order it, and people would look at us like, kids aren't supposed to like liver. I'm like, well, we've had it and we know what it's like, so we like it.
Yeah,
And I really just sad to see that people don't serve it too much anymore, because there seems to be this kind of like reversion to it in the public. I think because most people have bought the hype and don't really think it's any good, where that's totally not the case.
it really isn't the case. I mean, I put deviled chicken livers on my very first menu, the first day we opened, and it never left the menu.
Yeah.
It became, I didn't realize it, but it kind of became my signature dish, and people absolutely loved it. Again, it's just getting over that mental barrier of offal being weird. I mean, I don't know about you, thinking about my school dinners when I was a kid, and we used to have liver and onions, and it was just overcooked and it was grey, and sometimes the tubes were still on it.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So again, it's that kind of bad cooking that we're infamous for, and I've certainly experienced. So we don't do ourselves any favors. I don't know if it's the same in the US. It's offal cooked well. Maybe it's trickier to do than we're giving it, credit for. But you've got to do it well. Just do it well. It's easy to say, isn't it?
I
think people don't know what they're aiming for. People don't know what it's supposed to be like. And if you overcook something like liver, it's just not nice.
No.
It is hard because it's like I say. Would you say that they're just skills that have been just lost a little bit?
Yeah, I do. I think like in the Depression, we had a lot of people that were cooking things to make money, and like I think during the 70s, it came back a little bit because people wanted to save money. But I don't know. I feel like during the 90s, all this processed food came out. People stopped cooking foods. I think it's the same with game meat, because like I've learned to cook game meat through necessity and frugality, because I knew hunters who would give me stuff. So I learned very much you can ruin pheasant really easily.
Mm-hmm.
If you cook it well, it's delicious, but if you cook it badly, it's crap. And like I think all game meat's like that. You have to know what you're doing, and I think offal's like that too.
Yeah, I mean it's quite expensive to buy as game in the US, isn't it?
Yeah.
I remember seeing it. Really expensive. But in the UK, if you go to my butcher is also shoots game, so there's always loads of game to buy, and it's maybe £4 for a pheasant.
Yeah,
that's nothing.
That's really quail,
and the flavor you get just from the bones to make stock is really you don't have to put lots of meat in there to make it flavorsome. You feel like you're eating like a king, but you've just spent a £5 for the whole meal. It's crazy. People think being frugal means it's just boring old starchy food that's uninteresting, and it really doesn't have to be the case.
No, not at all. Now I was impressed by your pedigree, and you've been able to be a commentator on Channel 4's British Most Historic Towns, Radio 4's The Food Program, as well as Telegraph cookery competition for food bloggers. So you've been on the media quite a bit. Has that kind of changed your life at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, it has. Well, first of all, I mean, I don't do them all the time. It's not my main job. And as I was saying before, I didn't get into all of this for it to be my job. So it's another thing that I consider myself, as a really lucky guy to be asked to do these things. It's just nice to be asked. So yeah, I mean, I guess it has changed my life, because I think it's important that people see that you kind of really mean it that what you're doing, you're really interested in. So it's all those media things that I've done. They're not my bread and butter, but they're kind of my online CV resume. So yeah, it has changed my life from that point of view. It's doing the media stuff that's really led me on to, be able to write my books and things like that, which I was having quite a lot of difficulty getting off the ground. Well, I wasn't getting off the ground.
Yeah.
So yes, indirectly, yes, they have really changed my life. They're such good fun to do. They're very nerve-wracking and stressful, especially that the competition for bloggers. That was stressful.
That sounds very stressful.
Oh man,
I couldn't do it.
It was made by the same company that make MasterChef in the UK, the same production company. So it was really full on. And that's it. And it was one weekend's worth of work, which is the amount of stuff they probably do they do for one episode of MasterChef. I'm sure it's pretty much the same in the US. Yeah. How those guys can do that competition and get to the final, I just do not know.
I couldn't do it.
I was ready to implode after the first 45 minutes.
Yeah. This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org. Brought up your books. I wanted to talk about The Dark History of Sugar, which is coming out next month, or in June.
It's 30th of April in the UK, 30th of May in North America.
Right. So this will be out the week when we're airing this, it'll actually be the week that it comes out. So I'll put that at the intro as well as in a link. But yeah, great. So I'll save that till then. But The Dark History of Sugar, I was really impressed with. You had sent me a copy of it and I got to read it and I was really blown away. It wasn't quite what I expected. And I don't know what I was expecting. I mean, I expected, we hear stuff and you read stuff about sugar and its effects, but it's really a political work, isn't it?
It's really political. And in fact, that's the most difficult part to get your head around, I think. I haven't studied history academically. I haven't got off and done a degree in, European history. So I'd come into it from a very non-academic way. So I've got big gaps I have to fill in my historical knowledge. It's great with the science side of things. I feel like I'm kind of above your average historian because I know the science and the anthropology. But I really found that a bit difficult. I also found it difficult to make it interesting to read.
It was very interesting.
When you get political, thank you. Because when it gets political, it does get a little bit bogged down in politics, obviously, which can be a bit dry. But yeah, it is all politics. It's all politics, manipulation, and exploitation. Unfortunately, exploitation from any angle you care to think of workers, of slaves, of consumers by the big companies, exploitation of the planet, for the awful deforestation and pollution it causes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it had really big old dark history. In fact, I would argue there's nothing light at all about its history.
It kind of was this nexus, though, that like sugar and slavery, and then colonialism of the areas where sugar were grown, which what kind of produced the colonialism in the West Indies and in America. And it just, the whole thing was sugar just kind of was this lever where everything, would you say that's like it just, this sugar was discovered and then everything kind of just fell into place for slavery. And it was just kind of incredible how that all just came together. I mean, I'm sure it's more complicated than that.
Well, it's that kind of mixture. Well, you're right. So it's history always seems to be a mixture of stuff that was bound to happen,
yeah,
mixed with weird chance events. there's always that question where, people do those kind of what if experiments. What if this happened? What if Hitler wasn't born? What would happen? And they seem to think that, like, some other slightly different thing would have happened. But of course, it would have been massively different. Absolutely massively different. Some argued maybe not the case, but it's that weird tension between randomness and total predictability. And yes, I mean, with sugar, it was discovered, from an evolutionary point of view, all we want to do is eat sugar. And if we're not eating sugar, think about eating sugar or how to get sugar. And if there is no sugar around, sit and think about it and miss it. That is an evolutionary adaptation.
Yeah.
So things were bound to happen. Once we worked out how to make sugar and we weren't just waiting around for honey, obviously we're going to go nuts. And sugarcane was the way we did it. So you have to boil away all that water. So you have to deforest the place. And we were blocked by Asia. We weren't going to move anywhere. It was too hot for us Europeans. There's too much desert. We're not going to go that way. So the only way we could go was west. So that was going to happen. But when we got to the fringes, when we got to the Canary Islands and Madeira, we hit a brick wall. And this is where randomness comes in, I suppose. I mean, obviously we were going to find a new world eventually. So Columbus discovered it in 1492. If it wasn't him, it'd have been somebody else in 5 years' time or something, because they were really planning. They thought they were going to meet up with India, and they didn't. But that was going to happen. So But when it comes to slavery, that is as far I think, totally random. That could have very easily not have happened. Because it seems like it was just a chance encounter. Shall I tell you the story?
Yeah, please.
So mid 15th century, Portuguese buccaneer, i.e. pirate, called Gonçalves, was going down Africa looking for ivory and spices and gold and things like that to take back. So he'd look good in the courts.
That's actually a relative of my wife's.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that.
So, I mean, I was going to fairly innocently, but innocently in terms of what we're working with here, it was obviously awful. But he was just doing what all the other colonists were doing. That's what I'm saying. He captures some Muslims. Some were of Middle Eastern descent and some were North African. Because, of course, in North Africa, there was all the Muslim empire that traveled along from the Near East over a few centuries. And they were going to use them as slaves. Now, I mean, slaves have, of course, been used throughout history.
Yes.
And there's no such thing as okay slavery.
Right.
But there are different forms. And, most of the slavery usually was prisoners of war, people who are in the way.
Yeah.
So if you capture some people, you may as well put them to work. I mean, there was Roman slaves as well, which was maybe a bit different, but certainly in medieval times, that's your flavor of slavery that's going on.
Yeah.
They said to Gonçalves, you shouldn't be enslaving us because we're men of God. And all right, we might not agree on some of the rules, but we're all basically, worshipping the same God. And Gonçalves kind of thought, well, yes, you have a point. And they said, well, how about you let us go, but we know where there's some people who you can have, who are the sons of Ham. And in the Old Testament, sons of Ham was Noah's youngest son.
Yeah.
And there's a really, I'm not Christian, so I didn't know any of this. So Noah has his ark. That's a very familiar story. Everyone knows that story. But what people don't know is that towards the end, Noah got really drunk, stripped naked, and was discovered by Ham. And he was so embarrassed that he banished his son Ham, which I think is a bit unfair. It wasn't
kind of an overreaction.
Drunk and naked. It's like, should be pointing that shame inwards, Noah, not outwards. So he said, I banish you to a life of servitude, and I'm extending this curse to all of your descendants.
Wow,
So they
Noah was a
said,
jerk.
yeah, he really was. That's your headline. Noah
Noah is
was
a
a
jerk.
dickhead.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's what it said. So these people are not only maybe easy to enslave, but they are slaves. They're born slaves. They want to be slaves, and that's how it happened. So if they hadn't met those group of people, there wouldn't have been a transatlantic slave trade.
Oh, that's
Because
crazy.
that random association wouldn't have happened. So, I mean, obviously, the amount of racism there is now, is absolutely, endemic, and
Yeah.
we're all, unfortunately, we're all some type of racist. If you think you're not racist, you're racist.
We're exactly.
You do a bit of reading. There's unconscious bias.
Yeah.
There's all that kind of stuff. Really endemic, and it's obviously been cruel and horrible. But its origins are happenstance, bad luck, and racism, at least in the modern sense of the way we think about it, had nothing to do with it. It was just geography.
Yeah.
If anything.
Reading your book, it really struck me. There were a couple things that struck me. Was just the blatant mean inhumanity. Like, it's funny, the little details that grab you. But you had a part where they were talking about how they had only given the sugarcane growing slaves shoes because if they didn't, they got cuts and boils and stuff on their feet, which would inhibit them as workers. So they only gave them shoes just because it was expedient to do so. And I was floored by that detail. I was like, they begrudgingly gave them shoes. I was like, man, that's pretty rough. Like, I can't even imagine that.
I know. I mean, I suppose what we should say actually before we maybe talk about slaves more is that this is a book about sugar. It's not about slavery. So how slaves
exactly.
weren't just slaves were found in other places. It was specifically sugar that slaves were used for.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about slavery, we are talking about sugar.
Yeah.
Other things that obviously come off from that. Yes, there were domestic servants who were African slaves too, but none of those would be there if it wasn't for the slaves who were being, hauled over the Atlantic for the sugar. So I just thought I'd just mention that because I know it's two different things, but they are also obviously intrinsically linked. They call it the sugar slave complex.
Yes,
you can't eke the two apart.
Right.
And of course, there were slaves used on chocolate plantations and coffee plantations, but they were a very small proportion. We're talking maybe 7% of slaves were used on non-sugar plantations.
Yeah, some would argue that today we still have chocolate slavery. I know that Tony's Chocolonely company, I don't know if you've heard of them, but their advertising campaign is non-slavery chocolate. And it's amazing because they really provide a lot of information about child laborers picking chocolate.
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, certainly when I was a high school student in the UK, I remember having history lessons, and there'd be, I remember, and the thing is, I went back and ended up being a high school teacher, and I covered a few history classes, and they were still teaching the same lesson. I don't know about your history classes in the US, but basically the lesson was
not good.
in the textbook. It'd be a double page about the horrors of transatlantic slavery.
Yeah.
There'd be always that drawing, that really infamous drawing of all the slaves lined up, in the hull of the ship, the Brooks ship. Oh, it was awful.
Yeah.
12 million slaves. And then the page on the other side was, but the British abolished it. Aren't we great? That was essentially the lesson.
Yeah.
And fast forward to things like Black Lives Matter, and people in England anyway, or in Britain, are going, hang on a minute, we're great, are we? we abolished slavery and there's no racism or anything anymore, isn't there? What, and people have really, their heads have really exploded.
Yeah.
And I think, well, it's frustrating, but at the same time, this isn't thing, I think about this all the time as a job. Most people don't think about it. They just remember that day that they got taught about it that time. And that's what they think's happened. So suddenly to be told that slavery hasn't stopped, slavery carried on, it just wasn't called slavery anymore, and it's still going on. And we're actually all, to some degree, if you're a white Westerner, in a weird way, slightly, even it might be a little bit, we're all a bit implicit in that.
Yes.
We turn away, we bury our heads under the sand. So we might not be actively racist people, but we turn away, we put our heads into the sand and go, oh, it's awful, I don't want to hear about it. And that kind of is almost like soft racism, I suppose, which maybe most people do. I've certainly been guilty of that in the past.
Me as well, but I mean, I'm trying not to be. I'm trying to be a better person, but yeah.
Well, exactly. It's about being a better person. And when I was writing the book, I could have written about the dark history of sugar from the point of view of different concepts: a chapter on evolution, a chapter on slavery, a chapter on environment, a chapter on politics, a chapter about just little independent essays. But I really wanted to build up the journey we go on from essentially the first time people discover how to make sugar from sugarcane in India, how we got from that to the massive mess we're in now. And that had to be chronological. I mean, it's a complex story, so it would have been easy just to write independent essays. But I thought, no, people actually need to be able to connect those dots, because that is the problem that we've got in the minute of a lot of white people, of European descent, sort of really being very confused, lashing out, especially working class people. I'm from a working class family. Today, this is not against working class people, but they're saying, hang on a minute, we've got a crap life as well. And you hear things like all lives matter, which if you're not listening, you go, hang on a minute, well, yeah, all lives do matter, don't they? Yeah. And yes, they do. That's the problem with a lot of sort of more right-wing slogans. There's a tiny kernel of truth in there. But I think what people don't realize is the patriarchy, the white patriarchy, they're oppressing working class people just as much as they're oppressing black people. And actually, we should be on the same side.
I totally agree. We missed that here. I don't know how we missed this in America, but you're absolutely right. It's the same here. People that would benefit from the same benefits if they agreed with Black Lives Matter, it doesn't hurt them. It only helps them, and they're still against it.
Really does. But that's why the patriarchy are so good. They're so good at drawing these fake lines between us socially and pitting one set of people against other set of people whilst they're rubbing their hands, essentially. So I really wanted to, I know it's just about a book about sugar, but when I was writing it was during the pandemic and all the Black Lives Matter protests, and I thought, yes, it's not about racism, but sugar is slavery, and slavery in the main, anyway, say when it comes to people of African descent, well, it's slavery and it's sugar, and it's all the same thing. I felt like I had a bit of a duty to kind of get that right, and line it all up for people and walk them through it.
It's a complex book, but you write it so well. It's so readable, and it just, I went through it quickly because I was really engaged in the story and the narrative you were giving. And you talk, and it does, you open up a lot of things. There's a lot of historical there. There's a lot of like socioeconomic stuff there. There's a lot of medical and health stuff there. And I was just really engaged by it. So I really want to tell everybody who's listening to this, it sounds complex. And I mean, we may have made it sound heavy by mentioning the slavery parts, but it really is a very engaging book that really is relevant today. So much, even though it tackles history, it really definitely brings up to date, like, issues. And you do talk about that in the part where you're talking about it is a dark history of sugar, but we could turn the corner. Do you want to talk about some of your ideas on that?
Yeah, I mean, I did kind of feel like people might be feeling a little bit forlorn after reading it because
Not
it's
at
a dark
all.
history of
Not at
sugar.
all.
So I thought I needed to leave it a bit more in a positive way. Pandora's box has been opened.
Yeah.
Can we put it all back in there? I mean, well, the short answer is no, of course. But what I would say is there are things that we can do. I was saying that sugar is a story of exploitation. So, we can try and take the exploitation out of there. So when it comes to the environment, for example, so, I mean, for centuries, it didn't change. I mean, people are a bit more efficient now, but, if you extract sugarcane juice, 7 kilos, I don't know what that is in imperial, 7 kilos of juice, you have to evaporate. Yeah, you have to evaporate 5 kilos of water to get 2 kilos of sugar. I mean, that's huge. A huge amount of energy is required. So the environmental impact just of making sugar that way is huge. I mean, we have fancy centrifuges now and vacuum pumps and stuff like that, but it's still very intensive. So moving to not using refined sugar. If you have to have cane sugar, don't use the white stuff. The unrefined. We call it golden sugar in Britain, but it just hasn't gone through that final stage of refining, which uses loads and loads of energy. And you know what? You can't taste the difference.
Yeah.
It still does all the same stuff. Your jellies and jams will still set, a meringue will still be nice and light. And, it's fine. No one to know. And in the UK, I mean, we've got a really good sugar beet industry in the UK.
Yes.
So, it's local sugar, which seems nuts because, you always think of it as such a tropical product, but we've got local sugar. Some of it's grown in Scotland, dingy old Scotland. I love Scotland. That was a joke. So, I mean, it's much less energy is needed, fewer food miles. So that's one thing you can do. When it comes to health, one thing that I really wanted to have a go at in the book was sweeteners, and go, we're using these sweeteners now instead of sugar, but we're just swapping one problem for another. Yeah. But you know what? I could actually find very little evidence that it was a bad thing, really. I mean, there's a little bit of, there's some people out there saying, it might be carcinogenic. It's like, well, only if you're drinking liters of the stuff, like literally, which no one does. And it's certainly better drinking a 32 ounce, carton of soda. It's certainly much better than that. So and there's lots of natural ones now, like stevia from the stevia plant. So I'm very pro sweeteners. Very pro sweeteners. Yes, okay, they might have some detrimental effects, but they're nothing compared to sugar itself.
Yeah.
So making that switch, cutting down on the amount of sugar that you have, and the best way to cut down on the sugar that you have is to make as much food from scratch as possible.
Absolutely.
It's probably the most important thing. Processed food that you buy, it has to appeal to the masses. So you can't have any strong flavors in there. You can't actually make a chili that's actually got loads of chili in it, because most people don't like things that hot. So you're left with salt and sugar as your flavorings. So it all gets dumbed down. Corners are cut, to make it cheap. These are businesses that want to make, money. This is capitalism. Yeah. You make something yourself, whether it's just a loaf of bread or whatever, it's cheap, it fills you up, there's less sugar. And you see the amount of sugar going in there, or the amount of salt going in there or whatever. And, it might make you think, oh, I should eat less of that cake then. I didn't realize that a sponge cake, a pound cake, is a quarter sugar. It's 25% sugar, which is nuts.
Yeah, it's true.
So maybe I'll have a smaller slice. But the thing is, if you buy it's Mr. Kipling is the big company in Britain that kind of sells factory-made cakes.
Yeah, I've had those.
That their cakes are much more than a quarter sugar, because it gives them an extra long shelf life too.
Yeah, if it's going to sit there for half a year, it's going to have a lot of sugar.
Yeah, so things like that. And of course, things like, tomato sauces, for pasta and things like that, got so much extra sugar in. Things that you wouldn't think of. So yeah, I think that's the most important thing, learning how to cook. It's kind of a boring answer, I suppose, but it is really important. And then, like you say, from the point of view of exploitation of workers, buying, Tony's Chocolate Only, Cadbury's are in the news at the moment in Britain. Where Cadbury's is the Hershey's of the UK, and there's a lot of exploitation going on there. Child exploitation has just been discovered going on there. Cadbury's, I don't think, knew anything about it, and this is the problem with these long food chains. That so much stuff goes on that's unseen, and it's easy to look away, as we were saying before, so that things just get swept into the carpet. So making sure it's got some kind of fair trade stamp on there. If it hasn't got a nice, obvious fair trade stamp on there, it's not fair trade.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point, because all of us, I mean, I include myself in this, but the people that work for companies, if you work for a company that's involved in something where down the line there's some exploitation, people want to say, hey, that's not me, shut up, you're not being fair, I'm not a bad person. But
yeah,
I think we all need to say, am I involved? What can I do? And if I, give up something, like, is innocent as chocolate that's being exploitative, will that have a ripple effect out? If enough of us do this stuff, will it actually have a good effect where people's lives are being changed? It's like you can definitely buy your Nike shoes, but if a child in a country is doing, making 3 cents a day, working 15-hour days, making your shoes, do you really need those shoes?
Yeah. And if you're buying something so complex as shoes, and you said so innocent as chocolate, but I mean, this is the wool that's pulled over our eyes, because there's nothing innocent about it. It's a tropical product. It's got to be fermented. It goes through a massive processing thing.
Yeah.
So if you're buying a chocolate bar for under a pound, for $1 or whatever, I mean, that's nothing.
Yeah.
Like, how does that even? I cannot get around the economics of how that is $1. It has to be shipped across the world, it has to be marketed and everything. Like, how is that $1? So if something is so cheap, it's basically unbelievable. But we're so used to things being so cheap that when you think about it, it's like, right, if I didn't wince a little bit because it was expensive, then there's something wrong. I always feel the same when I go into a supermarket and see a poor old standard kind of roasting chicken, and it's £2.99. It's like, how is that animal not even eaten £2.99 worth of food in its life? Never mind it being sold for that amount. I can't get my head around it, and that's because there's got to be a huge amount of exploitation going on there. And if it's not people, then it's the environment. And if it's not the environment, it's the animals themselves, unfortunately. I mean, but we're stuck unless we get the choice. And, I mean, we're really interested in food, so we're geeky about it. We will look and we will shop around. But, if you're in a hurry, you've got 45 minutes to do it. You've got 3 kids. Possibly those 3 kids are with you, in the supermarket trolley. You don't have time to make those decisions and think about these things. You get the thing that is the cheapest or the most brightly coloured or the one at eye line. I mean, all these confectionery companies spend a lot of extra money making sure that their goods are on the eye line shelf when you're going around the supermarket, so they get picked first. No one wants to be on the bottom shelf. So yeah, I mean, there's all these things. It's very complex, and until we get given a bit of actual real choice. Did you get Coca-Cola Life in the US?
Yes.
In the green cans?
Yep.
And it was reduced sugar and with stevia added in there.
Yeah, I've never had it.
It lasted about, nobody did. It lasted about 6 months. And there's a chocolate bar called Milky Bar as well in this country. It's just a white chocolate bar. It's by an evil Nestle. We won't get started on them. That is open a can of worms. But they produced a low sugar alternative, which apparently tasted the same. No one bought that either. But it was taking away our customer rights, as to choose between the high sugar and low sugar. And we're all such idiots and also addicted to sugar,
Yeah.
but we didn't want the half measures.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you can't tell the difference. So why didn't the companies go, oh, well, let's just make these the standard ones then? No one would have known. But sugar's cheap, it's a commodity, and it keeps people hooked. But they all say, but we tried our best, we gave people the option. It's obvious that that's not enough. We can't help ourselves. And I include myself in this. You know, I'm fairly disparaging about how weak we are around confectionery and sugar, but oh man, I'm a sugar addict. Writing all the chapters, you know, on type 2 diabetes and, you know, people having their legs amputated, it just made me think, oh, I could murder a Mars bar.
Yeah, I was reading that while I was eating Cadbury eggs and stuff. You know?
You know, so I'm just as bad as everyone else.
Yeah.
You know, so I hope people bear that in mind. It was a little bit of a message to myself, a lot of that, you know, try and look in the mirror and cut down. It's hard. You know, when the restaurant was opened and we'd run out of, I don't know, lettuce or something, so I had to make some mad dash out to a store to buy some lettuce. I'd on purpose go back via Sainsbury's supermarket. Mm-hmm. They sell, this should be illegal, five jam donuts for 65p.
Oh, come on.
I mean, how's that even possible?
That's the pusher man.
I pop in there. I probably done 15-hour shift that day, and I'd be running in, and I would buy them. And in the 3-minute drive it took for me to get from Sainsbury's back to the restaurant, I'd eaten all 5.
I could do that too.
No, basically, they didn't really touch the sides. Shove them in. Scooby-Doo. So yeah, I mean, it's terrible. And, you know, and the more busy you are, the worse choices you make.
Absolutely.
In the long run. One makes. Like I say, I'm included in this too. So I've not really answered your question. You know, how do we get out of it? Yeah, I mean, giving us a choice and magically somehow give us the time to make those choices.
Thinking about it, I think, helps. And reading your book, I think, helps because it gives us some perspective. And perspective is what we need. We need to be able to be educated. And I think your book really does a great job towards that.
Oh, thank you.
So what is next for you? I mean, I know you got the book coming out and everything, and there's a lot of hubbub around that, but what's next for you? Mm-hmm. What are you going to be working on next?
Well, just a couple of months ago, I handed in my second book, which I can't say too much about at the moment.
Okay,
it's completely different. It's about British food history, and specifically the 18th century. Ooh. And I suppose the origins of what we think of as now as traditional food, but lots of other things are mixed in there: domestic service and the way kind of hotels and restaurants and inns and taverns were run. Yeah, about servants and serving staff and food culture. That's all I can kind of say about that at the moment. But I've written 2 books in 2 years now, and wow. I'm exhausted. What an idiot. What was I thinking?
Okay, I mean, actually, that's impressive.
I'm having a break. Thank you. I'm having a break from book writing for a bit. I've got a few ideas bubbling away at the back. So really, at the minute, I'm concentrating on some smaller things. The poor old blogs have been sadly ignored a little bit. So I'm doing some more fun writing. I'm doing my podcast too.
Nice. Very much. We're going to put links to that in there too. It's a wonderful podcast. I should have mentioned it, but yeah.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to put links to that in the bio as well. So anybody listening you can just go to the bio, and there'll be links to your Neil's podcast as well.
I think, yeah, I'm just editing together the last kind of couple episodes of this sort of chunk. And I already think about the next one, so that's really good fun. And yeah, I mean, I'm keeping busy. Oh, I'm working on. We had to pause briefly because of COVID, but creating a zero waste food hall stroke restaurant with a kind of grocery store attached to it, which is also going to be zero energy.
I love that. That's great.
So the reason I'm on board with that one is obviously the cooking side of things. You know, if we want to be zero waste, then we need to be able to process food that's maybe going to go off and magically turn it into something else we can sell. But with it being zero energy, there's other people looking into the big current technology. That's not my bag at all. So my job is to kind of go, well, what did we used to do before refrigeration and before electricity? We used to preserve our stuff then. So it's using a lot of kind of natural fermentation techniques, which is obviously is really popular in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and North America and South America, actually.
Yeah.
But we like kind of lost that culture. In fact, some people even think that we never had that culture in the first place. I mean, we did, because everywhere did. But it's been so forgotten. It's all quite, you know, we all think sourdough is this new amazing thing.
Yeah. Not at all, but
not at all. So it's really looking into our lost sort of preservation practices and things like that, and bringing those back too. So that's got a slow burn on it. That's going to be a few years in the making, but that's the other kind of big project I'm doing at the minute.
That is all very impressive. I don't know when you get a chance to rest. I hope you can find some time to vacation and take some time off in all this.
Yeah, well, I've just had COVID, so I had to rest then.
Oh, nature is a big staycation. Yeah.
Yeah. I am a bit of a workaholic. The thing is, it is fun. Most of the time it is fun. I mean, obviously there's a deadline to me, it's not fun. Yeah. But most of the time it's fun, especially if you're in control of what you do. You know, that you can turn down things that you're not interested in. Or I'm lucky that I can do that. I mean, there's quite a few years where I just had to say yes to everything. So it's quite nice. I'm very lucky, but because it's fun, and because I'm always looking for the next thing, I tend to not stop. There's always an extra plate to start spinning, just as one plate's being put down.
Yeah, you're very much like me. I'm the same way. Well, it's been very good talking to Neil. I really appreciate getting a chance. It's been great talking
to you too.
And I'm really encouraging people to read A Dark History of Sugar. It's just a brilliant book. I think it's going to do very well. I predict it's going to be a bestseller.
Oh, thank you very much.
Well, Neil, thank you.
I hope so.
Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yes, you too.
Yep.
That again was my conversation with Neil Buttery about his book, The Dark History of Sugar. We have links to it in the bio, as well as his podcast information and blog. You really should check that out. He's just, a great guy, as you could tell from our conversation. I really enjoyed talking to him, and he's just, that good of a writer. His book is amazing, so check it out this week as well. It's out this week. So, that being said, I just want to go over the fact that we have a link on the bio for buying me a coffee. If you like the program, leave a kind of virtual tip, as it were, to buy me a cup of coffee or a pint. And then also, we really encourage people to share the podcast online. If you like an episode, if you like the program, share the information on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. We really enjoy the shout out if you like it. You can follow the Well-Seasoned Librarian on Spotify or iTunes, and you get updated every week when new episodes come on. You can subscribe to the podcast newsletter and get updates on my articles and more at the link in the bio. I will be honest with you, I have not done the newsletter in over a month, but I will be getting back to it and be sending out solid emails, newsletter lists every week. And I want to also give great thanks to Asian Men Records for letting us use the song Talk About Love by the band Kitty Cat Fan Club for the intro and outro of our podcast. It's so really appreciated. And I want to also say that we have a link to Asian Men Records in the bio. You can go check out the band Kitty Cat Fan Club, get their albums if you like the theme song, as you should, because it's amazing. And also any other bands that are hosted by Asian Men Records, check those out as well. You can buy LPs from them. You can buy CDs. You can buy bumper stickers, t-shirts, hoodies, anything. So check them out as well. I hope you all have a really great week and weekend, as it were, and keep on cooking.
I've been getting better, better than